Hi, and welcome to Bloody Good Reads. I am your host, Mark Goddard, and we are back with horror this time round. We've gone on a little trip through the crime genre, and then we're back with the horror genre again, where we love to be. This week's guest has an amazing new book out called Night's Edge, which has come out when this podcast comes out about 2 months back. She's also the author of the amazing Phantom Forest, and is also a playwright, a screenwriter as well. So welcome to the podcast this week, Liz Kerin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming to the podcast. What we like to do here on Bloody Good Reads is force authors to pick 3 books they love, because I am a bastard. But before we get on to that stage, and before we get on to your amazing book as well, what I like to ask all our guests is, how did you get into the horror genre?
Oh, wow. I think I got into the horror genre because I was a child who was scared of everything, of my own shadow, of every time I turn off the lights, if I didn't know where my mom was, every time I would get like a paper cut and I'd see my own blood, I would have a panic attack. So I think it was in my DNA from the day I was born. I was just such an anxious kid. And then I started realizing that the things that scared me were the most exciting. So, as I got older and started reading more genre fiction and opening up to scary movies and just understanding mythology and that these were all just archetypes that everybody was familiar with. I don't know. I just settled into it and decided to start using my deep anxiety as an art form. And it's working out great.
It's something I like to ask a lot of authors as well on the podcast is, what was your reading habits growing up? Because if you kind of grew into the horror genre, what was you quite a big reader growing up? What kind of things did you kind of read?
Yes, I was. When I was very young, so between the ages of 7 and 9, I was reading a lot of mysteries and thrillers, Nancy Drew and the Boxcar Children and books like that. But then one of my friends gave me a copy of that that short story collection, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which is a classic.
Yeah.
I'm a 90s kid.
It's a popular one.
All kids my age. Yeah, very popular, I'm sure. Oh my God. And the illustrations in that just horrified me, but I couldn't look away. It was like a car wreck that I couldn't take my eyes off of. And I'd pull it off of my bookshelf late at night and I'd be like, oh, I'm going to look at the pictures. Oh my God. And I'd put it away. And that kind of that was the beginning of my terrifying love affair with this genre, which I started reading more of as I got older. Like I said, I became braver as I got to be older. And I was also a big movie buff and really into theater, all of that. So this is a very strange segue, but when I was 7 years old, my parents took me to see the Phantom of the Opera when it was touring in Chicago. And I was a very young child and it was very scary to me, but I loved it. And I would just be like, oh, that's so creepy. He lives in the basement of the opera house, but he's obsessed with this woman. Oh my God. There were a lot of weird dark tales that kind of flitted around my head when I was younger. So yeah.
Is that kind of why you were kind of drawn to kind of playwriting and screenwriting?
Yeah, in addition to being a big reader when I was younger, I also was an actor when I was, a child between the ages of, 6 and 12. I was in a lot of musicals and I loved writing plays on the side and I would perform them with my friends in elementary school. And then I was in a theater troupe where I started writing for them when I was in high school and then got into the Department of Dramatic Writing at New York University Tisch, where they would teach you playwriting, television writing, and screenwriting. So I kind of got a crash course in those 3 mediums plus fiction. And that's how I became.
Cool. Well, before we get on to kind of the origins of your first book, Phantom Forest, again, what we'd like to do here on the podcast is force authors to pick 3 books they love. So, what is your first bloody good read you brought along today?
Great. So my first pick for the podcast is Little Eve by Catriona Ward. By the way, this is a public service announcement for everybody listening. I just learned how to properly say her first name. It's not Catriona, it's Catriona. And I learned this because I was moderating a panel with her at Comic-Con last week, and I'd been saying her name wrong all weekend. And she finally...
so have I. Don't worry.
And she finally told me how to say it. And I said in front of the audience, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I've been saying your name wrong the whole time I've known you." But her book, Little Eve, won the Shirley Jackson a few years ago. And it's, I read her, her books, Last House on Needless Street and Sundial first before I picked up this one. I love this book. I read it last year. And I can't stop thinking about the characters and this weird little sisterhood that she creates. And it's so eerie and so tragic. And the twists, I mean, she's just the queen of twists. And I don't want to say anything about the twists in this, but I feel like this is one of her titles that deserves to get more attention. And if you're a fan of hers, please pick it up. I really love it. My next pick is a collection of short stories, actually, that I recently finished, and it's called Garden of Fiends. It's a collection of short horror stories about addiction, and it was referred to me by the reviewer who reviewed my book for Booklist, and she compared Night's Edge to a few of the stories that are in here. So I was like, I'm very interested to pick this up. It's so visceral and so real and uses horror the way I like to use the genre, which is to, find a nuanced way to explore some really hard truths in real life. And there are two stories in this collection that particularly sparked my interest and made me want to add it to this list. And that is A Wicked Thirst by Keelan Patrick Burke and the story First Just Bite a Finger by Johan Thorsen. The second of which it is a masterclass in flash fiction. It is so unsettling and gross and exemplifies what it feels like when you say, I can stop this whenever I want. It's brilliant.
I mean, short fiction has been a lot more popular coming up recently. A lot of stuff that a lot of the darker stuff seems to come out of short fiction, which is always good. But
I find short fiction, when you're dealing with very dark subject matter, it's a digestible way to make a huge dramatic impact, that you're not, you kind of get in and get out and you make your point, and it goes through your heart and out your back, and then you're done, and then you just get to sit with it for a while. I think that's a brilliant experience. And my third title here is a book that's not out yet, but I've been lucky enough to read an advance copy. It comes out on Halloween this year, actually. And it's
perfect.
It's Nestlings by Nat Cassidy, who wrote the book Mary, An Awakening of Terror, which I also recently read. But Nestlings is also an homage to vampires in its own unique, twisted little way. And it has to do with a young couple who are living in New York, who win the housing lottery to move into a luxury building with their baby daughter, and all the creepy things that occur in this building once they get there. And it reminds me of Rosemary's Baby, but so much more feminist, and takes the side of the mother in a really, really interesting way. I highly recommend it. I can't wait till it comes out. And Nat is just fantastic. I'm doing an event with him in New York next week, actually.
He's coming on the podcast in a couple of months. So I'm actually quite looking forward to talking to him, actually.
He's the best. Yeah.
3 really good picks. I mean, Catriona Ward is obviously amazing. I love Sundial. But I do need to read Nestlings before I get Nat on as well. So three amazing choices. So
Thank
yes,
you.
ones to add to my collection. I've already got Little Eve on my shelf. I haven't read it yet.
Oh, great. Okay, go for it.
So it's on the list. Awesome. So let's go to your first book. So when did the kind of urge to kind of get into fiction writing happen for you, and where did the kind of the idea for Phantom Forest come about?
Yeah, I'd been writing fiction throughout my teenage years and into college, but like I said, I went to NYU Film School, so I was doing screenwriting, television, playwriting as well. Um, so I wasn't doing as much fiction, but I kind of concocted the idea for Phantom Forest when I moved from New York to California, and I was very lonely. I was confused about my career, and I was working an assistant job that I was quite unhappy at. And I started writing this really dark, twisty little fantasy story during my lunch breaks on Google Docs. I would go down the street, get a sandwich, and then come back to my desk and put my headphones on and just type away for an hour. And over the course of a year, I had this book, and I had written one full length novel prior to that I didn't do anything with, and probably never will. It was, as they call it, the trunk novel. But this one, I I was really, it's for those who haven't read it, and it came out as a very small release a few years ago, so not a lot of people have read it, but it's a story about what would happen if human beings discovered the truth about the afterlife, and it revolves around this demon and a young woman who gets caught up in a human sacrifice ritual that goes horribly wrong. So it's very dark and very peculiar and draws upon mythology from all sorts of different historical sources, because it deals with the question of what happens to us when we die and how humanity has done nothing but obsess over that question, for all of human history.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I loved the process of writing that, and then I rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. I was only like 23, 24 when I did the first draft of it, and it was published when I was 30. So that gives you an idea of how many drafts I did of it and how long it took to finally get out there. And I hope I had intended it for it to be the first of a trilogy. And other things just happened in my life, and I'm hoping to revisit it again really soon, because I miss those characters in that world. So hopefully you haven't seen the last of them.
Awesome. So obviously from there you've gone on to a new series because you've got obviously two books in the new series.
Yeah.
So your brand new book, Night's Edge, a vampire
Mhm.
novel, mother and daughter vampire novel, which is a nice little addition to the vampire genre. Are you a fan of vampires generally, or kind of?
Not really. So I actually, when I was younger, I loved the Interview with the Vampire movie when I was a kid, with the one with Brad Pitt and Tom
Mhm.
Cruise and Kirsten Dunst. But and then later read a few Anne Rice novels, which was fabulous. But I missed the whole Twilight rage. Um, I was a little bit on the outside of that, felt like maybe I was a little old for it. I don't know. So I never got deep into vampires. And I think that that helped me write this,
Mm.
because I had a very general working knowledge of all of the mythological signposts, right?
Mm.
But I wasn't so deeply absorbed in one vampire series or another that I was subconsciously ripping off somebody else's storytelling. Um, so I think that me not being that vampire girl kind of helped me write this.
Yeah, so you got kind of less the kind of romantic vampire kind of route and more like the Byzantium kind of route, where it's a bit more kind of a darker kind of a route. Would you say that, or?
Yes, yes. I mean, what I wanted to do was almost, because the gothic vampire genre is also its own thing. And it has traces of romanticism in it as well. I wanted to move away from all of that and place it in the present day in America with, change the relationship that the protagonist has with the vampire. Because usually, in so many of these classic vampire stories, you have a protagonist who is either the vampire itself or its intended victim, who is constantly battling, like, how do I feel about this person, etc. And I decided to use the vampire trope to explore codependency in families, specifically between parents and children. So that was my way in. And I found very quickly that a lot of the vampire mythology loans itself really well to the psychology of things like parentification, which is when a child takes on the role of a parent for a parental figure who, for whatever reason, is unable to parent, and giving up one's youth, one's lifeblood to sustain somebody else. And that's the crux of this story, really.
Okay. It's a really good story, I have to admit. I've been reading it gradually because I am very, very slow at reading. But no, I am loving the story, and it's got that nice little dark edge and that kind of more personal edge as well, which adds a lot to the story. So, for people who haven't obviously read the story yet, can you tell us a little bit about the plot of the story?
Sure. So it revolves around a young woman named Mia who, when she was 10 years old, her mother was infected with this incurable disease called Saratov syndrome by a boyfriend. And it basically, has symptoms reminiscent of vampirism. She suddenly finds she can't go out in the sunlight, has to subsist on human blood. And her 10-year-old daughter is caught in the middle of this and has to help her mother learn how to survive, especially when this horrible boyfriend just like leaves them high and dry. So Mia finds a solution to help her mother hide from people who would lock her away for her condition and keep her from hurting people in their community by giving her a dose of her own blood every night. And this continues for 13 years. And then we meet Mia when she's 23, and they are still living together. And Mia has given up so much of her youth and her own coming of age and adulthood to look after her mom. And they've both started growing resentful of each other in different ways. And they reach a crossroads when Izzy, Mia's mother, reconnects with her old boyfriend who infected her 13 years ago. And Mia meets a young woman named Jade, who she realizes she has feelings for and has this late in life queer sexual awakening that she's so afraid to tell her mom about. And both of them are grappling with what would it mean to loosen this bond, and what are the stakes if they ever moved away from each other. And unraveling that codependency is what the story's all about.
That is Night's Edge, and that is out now through Tor Nightfire. Again, another publisher who publishes some amazing books, and I highly recommend this. I am really loving it. I am a vampire fan, not so much of the Twilight side of things, but more the other side of it. And it does kind of hit all the marks of kind of not too vampire-y, but also very kind of personal and dark moments. And yeah, it's got everything inside this book, so go and check it out now. So First Light, which is the follow-up, so that's coming out in 2024. Is there much you can say about this one? Or?
Yes, I can say a few things. I think it's complicated to explain too much about the plot without revealing spoilers.
Exactly.
For the end of Night's Edge. But It basically follows Mia after this massive crisis of faith with she and her mother, and when she's trying to move on with her life, but realizes she never will until she vindicates her mother by tracking down her ex-boyfriend Devin, who is the one who infected her. And in Night's Edge, he has a subplot which involves corralling the Saras, which are the vampires in this novel, to band together and infect as many people as possible with this disease and try to, take power back and stop hiding from the authorities and, embrace what they are. And her mother falls into this trap with him and kind of joins his creepy little cult, I suppose you could call it. And so Mia in the second book realizes, yeah, she'll never find any peace in her life until he gets what he deserves. And that's what it's all about.
Awesome. So that is Night's Edge, which you can get now, and First Light, which you can get next year. Do go and check out both the books. And yeah, so there's some amazing stuff for you to go and check out, especially if you're a fan of vampires, but not that other side of vampires. So, awesome.
Right.
So, is there anything else apart from obviously First Light that you're working on coming up?
Yeah, I'm in the early stages of writing a few new things. Right now, I have maybe like a quarter of a new manuscript for another work of horror genre fiction that, without saying too much, revolves around a group of women who escape a sex magic cult in 1930s New York City. And it has a lot to do with all of the occult trends that were going on during that time, the black magic of Aleister Crowley and all of those guys who he hung out with. And it's extremely dark, and I am having a good time with it. And again, it has, much like the Night's Edge books, takes a personal angle and uses dark genre elements to explore things that, we come across in our day-to-day lives that are, more troubling. So this book kind of delves into gendered power dynamics and how we force women to use their trauma for capitalism, and just what happens when you keep a powerful woman down for too long. So hopefully I'll finish that sometime next year.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast this week. Where can people find you if you like to be found?
I like to be found. I'm on Instagram mostly, and my username is just Liz Kerin, all one word. My website is lizkerin.com. I should update it more regularly. I feel like if you want actual updates, you should follow on Instagram. And I'm also I'm on Threads now. I think we're all slowly migrating over to Threads. I'm not on Twitter anymore. And I am on TikTok. Yeah, I know. Yeah. And I am on TikTok at Liz Kerin Author, but I lurk more than I post, but you can find me there.
Awesome. Brilliant. Again, thank you to Liz for coming on the podcast this week. Go and check out a copy of Night's Edge today. You can go and pick it up at Amazon. You can pick it up any good places that sell amazing books. And there'll be a link in the description below as well, so you can grab a copy there as well. As always, a huge shout out to our sponsor as well this week. That's Abominable Book Club, the UK's best and biggest horror and thriller book box service, bringing the wonders of a haunted bookshop straight to your door each month. You can get the Bare Bones box, which is just the books, which is absolutely fun and amazing, or you can get the Full Guts box, which is a brand new book, a possibly haunted second-hand book, and also another indie title. You get some UK snacks, some drinks, badges, sometimes a little bit of extra stuff in there as well. It's an amazing book box, and I highly recommend going checking them guys out. Use the code BloodyGoodReads at checkout to get 10% off your box as well. And go and check them out today. We've got some amazing signed copies coming up. You don't want to miss this out as well. As always, you can catch me over on X, Twitter, whatever they're calling it now, at Bloody Good Reads. You can catch me over on Threads at Bloody Good Reads, Instagram at Bloody Good Reads, and also over at the bloodygoodreads.co.uk website, where we have book reviews, film reviews, and a whole load of other stuff coming up as well. You can check that out. And also catch us every month on our sister podcast, which is Bloody Good Screen Movie Club, where myself, Niall, Chloe, and Marcus review movies of all random ends of the cinema. The next episode coming up will be our Alien, Predator, and Alien vs Predator episode, and we've also got our summer movies coming up the month after, which the guys have picked some interesting choices, to say the least. But as always, a huge thank you to listening to the podcast. If you do like the podcast, give it a like, a share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if there's any authors you'd like to get on the podcast, give me a shout over on the socials, and we can see what we can do for that. As always, I've been your host, Mark Goddard, and I'll see you next time.